Hi, this is Daniela with Community Library. Today I'm going to show you how to make this cute little needle punch design. If you are new to needle punch, then this is a great project for you because it's easy to make, it is quick to finish, and it's so much fun to do. And if you're anything like me and you have unfinished projects all over your house, whether it's cross stitch or sewing or quilting, then this is such a great craft because you can finish it in a relatively short period of time and have something completed, which is so exciting. Now, whether you've heard needle punch or punch needle, whether you've seen it as one word or two words, it's all the same thing. They can be used interchangeably. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have inside of our kit here. The first thing we have is a 5-inch hoop. This is an embroidery hoop, and the type that we're using here is called a no-slip hoop. And basically that is because this one has a ridge in the center here that locks into place on the inner ring, and it keeps your fabric super tight, which is really what you want when you're working on one of these. You want it to be taut like a drum. They do come in different sizes. There are bigger ones out there, but for the size of project that we're doing, this 5-inch one is perfect. If you are working on a bigger project, you want to make sure that you have a hoop that is big enough to have your whole design in the center of it. You can't always do this because if it's a really large project, you might not be able to find a hoop big enough, but if you have to then get your floss inside here, if you're moving it around your picture, you could maybe distort the floss or tear at it or something. So I think it's just best to make sure that your hoop fits your design. So that's that. Next item is our needle punch tool. And the tool that comes inside the kit is set already with the correct needle size and set at the right length for you to use. There are a couple of other needles inside the kit, one larger, one smaller, but this is the one that we're going to use for this particular project. You can, however, play around with it. If you want to use a thicker needle and maybe have a longer hoop, you can adjust your thread length here. I'm just going to undo this knob a little bit here. And then what I can do is move my needle up and down to determine how long my hoops are going to be, or my loops, I should say. Okay, so when I get to the length I like, I'm going to go ahead and just tighten that, and that's the size that we're going to use. We also have a needle threader, and basically the needle threader is a piece of very, very thin gauge wire folded in half, so it's got this little V at the end where we are going to place our thread through to pull through the whole punch. So that's what comes inside the kit, and actually it comes with 2 of the needle threaders. If you have checked this kit out to go specifically with the class, then your kit is also going to include a 10 by 10 inch piece of weaver's cloth, and this is the cloth that we're going to use to stitch on. Weaver's cloth is really the best thing to use for needle punch. You can use any type of fabric. I've used muslin in the past and it's worked fine. You just want to make sure that whatever you have has a really nice tight weave on it, so that your fabric doesn't tear as you punch through it. Also included is the floss that you're going to need for the project, as well as the pattern that we're going to punch. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is transfer our design onto our fabric. And if you have a light box, that's great. You can tape your picture down onto it, tape your fabric on top of it, and then as the light shines through, you'll be able to trace. If you don't have a light box, then the best way to do this is to go to a window, and you want to make sure you're doing this during the daytime, otherwise you won't be able to see very well, but tape your picture onto the window and then tape your fabric on top of it as well. And you want to make sure that you tape your fabric. I know sometimes you want to maybe skip that step, but if you do, what'll happen is the fabric will shift around and you're not going to have an accurate representation of the picture. So what I'm going to do is take the fabric and fold it in half this way, and I'm just going to make a little finger crease here in the center. I'm going to unfold it and fold it the other direction and make another little crease. And what that does is it gives me, and I don't know how clearly you can see this on the camera, but it gives me a cross here so I can see exactly where my center point is. So now I'm going to just go to the window and go ahead and trace my design on here. One thing I should have mentioned is you can use either a pencil or a pen to transfer your design onto your fabric, as long as you can see it clearly. I actually used a felt tip pen just so that you can see it on the camera here, but even just a pencil mark is fine. Sometimes when you purchase a pattern, it will come with the fabric pre-printed inside the package, and usually it is a really nice bold pattern that you can see clearly. But I have had a few that I've gotten where it's actually a really faint line and you can't see it very well. So then what I do is I take a pen and I go over those lines again just to reinforce them. So then as I'm stitching, I'm not wondering, oh, wait a minute, was that the rabbit's ear or not? So it just makes it a little bit easier for you. But once you have your design on the fabric, then we can go ahead and put it inside the hoop. So I'm going to grab the hoop here and open that up. And there are two schools of thought on this. Some people like to put their fabric right side up like this inside the hoop. Some people like to turn it upside down and do it this way, and then you're actually stitching inside of it. When I first learned how to needle punch, this is how I was taught to do it, but really I haven't noticed that it makes a difference either way. I think both methods work just fine. So however you prefer is just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and put it this way, and I want to try and get it in the center of the hoop there. Okay, so you can see, like I was mentioning earlier, you want your design to fit your hoop. This entire design fits inside this hoop, so we're not going to have to pull and tug and shift and possibly get our floss stuck inside the actual closure there. So now I just want to start tightening my hoop, and as I do that, I'm going to pull and tug this to make sure it's as tight as I can get it. And the reason for that is you want to make sure it's taut like a drum, because otherwise you might tear at your fabric. So just make sure it's nice and tight like that. And then we can go ahead and get started with the stitching. So if you go ahead and take a look at your floss here. If you are getting this kit after the program, after the class, and it does not come with the floss, then you can go ahead and purchase embroidery floss. I typically use DMC floss. It is an excellent quality, it's super affordable, and you can find it easily at Joann's or Hobby Lobby or even Walmart. I even found it, interestingly enough, at the Reinemann's True Value in Burlington. So just look around, you shouldn't have any trouble finding this. It comes, you know, anywhere between 50 cents to maybe 60, 65 cents for a skein. And this is what a skein of thread looks like. This is the DMC one, and it comes with these numbers printed on it. So when you're doing a pattern, the artist will give you the number for the different areas, and then you just purchase the floss in that color number and use it. There are other kinds of floss as well. There are some really beautiful specialty ones on the market, but some of them can cost upwards of $1.50 to $2, and really the quality isn't any greater than the DMC floss. It's just sometimes they're hand dyed, and so there's a little bit of variegation in the floss, and people will pay extra for that. So whatever kind you have handy or whatever kind you'd like to use, you can go ahead and use. And by all means, if you have a color that comes close that you like, use that instead. You don't have to stick to the exact colors that the artist gives you. Oftentimes, if there's a color I don't like, I might change it and kind of go my own way, do my own thing, and that is okay. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start stitching, and what we kind of want to do is start towards the center and work our way out. So the first thing I'm going to work on is the stem here, and the stem is going to use the green. And once I have my green floss pulled out, you'll notice that the embroidery floss actually has 6 strands in it. And we are going to be using 3 strands at a time for this project. So these can be separated pretty easily. This is where I usually have to put my cheater glasses on to be able to see it. I'm going to pull out 1 strand at a time until I have all 3. And this is the easiest way to do it, and it's also the way where it's not going to knot on you. So this is what I recommend. I'm going to take my 1 thread and I'm just going to pull it all the way through. So there I have the 1. And now I'm just going to repeat that again with a second one. Pull all the way through. And a third one. And I will pull it all the way through. So then I have my 3 strands here that I'm going to use, and I also have an additional 3 strands here that's ready to go when I need to rethread my needle. So let's go ahead and take these 3, and what we kind of want to do is line these threads up so they're all starting at the same place. So they're about the same height there, okay? And I just want to make sure that I don't have any knots or anything in the thread. And now I'm going to go ahead and actually thread my needle punch tool. So I've got my tool here, and I mentioned that this is a cylindrical needle. So what we're going to do is take our threader, the V part of the threader, and insert it inside the hollow of the needle. And I'm going to push it all the way down. And what you're going to want to do probably is remove this bottom cap from it, because it's just going to make it a lot easier for you to get your threader all the way through. So once I have the threader through on the other end, I'm going to take my floss and I'm going to insert it into that V, and then I'm going to pull it all the way through the top of the needle. So now, see how quick and easy that was? I've got that inserted, but there's one more step, and this is the step that I think people miss most often, and it's not going to work for you. The loops are not going to hold if you miss this step. You want to take a look at the front of your needle. There's actually a hole in here, and you want to take the V of your threader and insert it into that needle through the top, and then we're going to thread our floss through that V again, and this is the awkward part, and then just pull through. Okay, so you want to make sure that your thread is coming through the top part of that hole, and then we're just going to leave a tail of about 1 inch or so, and we can then start stitching. So what I'm going to do here is start with my stem right through the center there. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to take my needle punch tool, and I want to make sure that the top of the tool where the fabric is, or the thread, excuse me, is coming out, and I'm holding that up like this. And as I punch into my fabric, I want to make sure that my tool is straight up and down. Another thing we're going to watch for is as we need to turn a circle or something like that, we're never going to turn our tool. We're going to turn our hoop instead. So our needle is always held in this one position, and basically you're always going to be stitching towards yourself. So now I'm going to go ahead and just insert my first loop here. So I've got the needle up and down with the top of the needle facing away from me, and I'm going to insert it all the way into the fabric and then pull it out slowly. And now I want to make sure that I don't pull it away too far from the fabric. I'm going to move maybe 3 or 4 threads on the fabric, and you'll get the feel of that after you've done this a few times. And then I'm going to punch again and pull out and move down a tiny bit and punch again. And I'm just going to continue that until I get finished with this stem. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you what the stem looks like. And then we'll also take a look at how to finish it. So I've gotten to the bottom of where my stem needs to be. I need to go the other direction now, so what I'm going to do is turn my entire hoop rather than turn my tool. And now I'm going to start going this direction. And if you take a look, I don't know how closely you can see this on the camera, but my rows are right next to each other. Don't make them on top of each other, and you don't want to do it too far apart because then your pattern will be really sparse. But you'll kind of get a feel for it, and then you'll also get a feel for what you like best, because sometimes maybe you like a little bit of a looser look, or maybe you like a tighter look. It just depends. But you can see as I turn this around, my needle is all the way through, and you can see as I pull it through the other side how it creates that loop. And this is what it's going to look like on the other side. So let me turn it around again. I'm trying to be really careful here because I don't want to pull away too far from the fabric. If for some reason I get stuck on my thread, and let's say some of these loops pull out, it's okay, no need to panic. All we're going to do is untighten our thread, make sure it's not stuck on anything, and we're going to pull it through here until we get it really close to the fabric again, and then just punch again, no problem. Okay, so now I've gotten to the end of the part I want to do, and what I want to do is pull my thread out so that I can snip it. So I'm going to pull my needle out very carefully so that I don't pull any of the loops out, and I'm just going to put my thumb here to hold that in place while I pull the rest of the fabric, or excuse me, thread. Now I'm not going to take the thread all the way out of the needle because I have the leaves to do as well in the same color. So I'm just going to set it down, and I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to snip very close to the fabric. And make sure you have a sharp pair of scissors, because if your scissors aren't sharp and they fray the floss a little bit, you're going to be pulling loops out. So you want to make sure you have, and look, I just pulled out a loop when I did that. You want to make sure you have sharp scissors. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my thread through again and make those loops that I just pulled out. So that's what I like so much about this project, or this craft. It's very forgiving, and if you do make a mistake like that, no problem, you can just fix it very easily. Okay, so I'm going to pull that out, and now I'm going to snip close to, I'm also going to snip these starter ones where I began. And that's it. I've snipped close to the fabric there so I don't have anything sticking out. And there are my punches, my loops on this side. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the leaves. And basically you just move around the project like that. Okay, so I'm starting again with about an inch or so of a thread tail, and now I'm going to start on my leaf. And what I'm going to do is work on the outline of the leaf first and then work my way inside of it. So I'm going to start on this one here, and I'm going to start right here and just start punching all the way around that leaf. And make sure my needle is turned in the right direction. Pay attention to that. We're going to go all the way around. And remember, I'm going across maybe 3 or 4 of the fibers in the fabric. I can kind of feel that as I go. Make sure I move my tail over so I don't go over that. And now I'm going to go right next to this row that I finished here in the stem. So this is going to butt up right against it. And then we'll go around. And basically I'm just making these rows all the way around. And okay, right here I messed up a little bit. I went a little too far from my other line, and I also skipped a loop. So what I'm going to do is take out my tool, pull my thread through a little bit until I get to the point where I want to be, and then now I can just start stitching again. So again, I made a little flub there, no problem. We just took care of that, and we're just going to go ahead and continue stitching. And then we work our way all the way around until we finish this leaf, and then we can move on to the next leaf. And you can see it's starting to take shape. Now, don't worry about the fact that sometimes it may look like it's going to be sparse. What happens is as you stitch around, it's going to fill that in, and those fibers are going to come together. So if you are coming close enough, like I had mentioned here, don't worry so much about that until you kind of do other parts of it and fill in. So when we put in our background, it's going to butt up against these loops and it will fill it in. Okay, so now that I've finished working on my leaves, I'm going to turn this around so you can see it. And I just want to point out, it might look a little bit blobby here right now, but that's because I don't have other areas filled in. So once I do fill those other areas in, you're really going to see the definition of the leaves. So if you're at this point right now, it's okay, don't worry, it will clear itself out. So now I'm going to turn this back around again, and I'm going to start on the center of my flower. And I've already loaded my needle up with the yellow floss. And just like I did with the leaves, I'm going to start on the line and then work towards me, the top of the needle facing away from me, all the way around. And just a couple of tips I want to mention. Remember not to stitch over this tail. You want to kind of hold it off to the side until you get to a point where you can cut that off. And you want to make sure that you are not holding on to your floss. So if I'm doing this, I've got my elbow on my floss here and I start stitching, look what's happening. It's not holding. So I have to make sure that my floss isn't hung up on anything and it's free to move. So now when I start doing it again, those stitches are actually holding in place. Okay. Another thing, if you do for some reason pull out and you've got extra thread, remember that you can pull the thread through back the other side until, oops, this is hard to do like this, until you get to the actual fabric, and then you can begin to stitch again. So I'm going to go through and finish some of these other areas, and then we'll take a look. Okay, so I've stitched my stem and it looks a little bit sparse here, but again, like I said, once I fill in with all of the pink, it'll push that up. But what I want to show you here is I ran out of floss before I finished the flower. So I have these little strands sticking up here where the floss finished, and it could end up on this side or it could end up on the other side. All I want to do is, again, you remember you want to have those super sharp scissors. I'm just going to cut as close as I can to the rest of the loops and cut that out, and we're good to go. And then we just move on to the next part. So just remember, make sure that your floss is loose and not tied up somewhere. And as you start and finish, you want to make sure that you cut those tails as close as you can to the fabric when you're on this side, and as close as you can to the other loops when you're on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest, and then we'll talk about how to finish our projects. Okay, so I've finished stitching the whole thing, the whole picture. And I'm going to turn this around so you can see the back of it with all of my stitch lines. And you can see some white between the lines, and that is okay. You really don't want to see too much white on the other side. So if you do happen to notice a spot that maybe needs to be colored in a little bit, just turn it around, repunch it, and fill that right back in again. No problem. This is a really forgiving craft. You can probably tell that when I took my fabric out of the hoop, it left this line all the way around. That can be taken out with just a hot steam iron, no problem. I probably wouldn't wash this simply because I don't want to handle it too much, because I don't want these threads to come out. But again, if you've stitched, or excuse me, snipped closely enough back here, you really shouldn't be able to pull on any of the fabric to pull it out. So you should be okay. For completing the project, some ideas are you could get a pretty wooden decorative hoop and put it inside the hoop, and then all this would go inside, and then you can hang it up that way. You could put it inside a pretty picture frame. I've done that, and that looks really nice. Or you can maybe trim around some of this fabric, leave a few inches, and then you can fold under and stitch the rest of that fabric underneath. And now you can stitch this onto maybe like a little tote bag or a notebook cover or something like that. It's a cute little design. Maybe for one of our upcoming classes, we'll have to have something on how to actually finish one of these up and stitch it onto something. So thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or come across any problems as you're doing the project, please feel free to contact me at our Salem location. I would be happy to help. And thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.